The Wolf and the Seven Little Goats. Once upon a time, there was a mother's goat. This mother goat had 7 adorable little kids, and she loved them just as a human mother loves her kids. One day, the mother goat decided to go to the forest to get some food, so she called her 7 little goats together and told them, "Listen, kids, mommy is going into the woods, so while we're there you have to watch out for the wolf. If he comes into the house he'll eat you all up. The bad guy keeps changing his appearance. But he has a husky voice and black legs, so it's easy to tell he's you." Then the baby goats said, "Mother, it's okay. We'll all be careful. So don't worry and go." So the mother goat baa and went off, relieved and at ease. Soon afterwards, there was a loud knock on the front door. "Then, children, open the door. It's mommy. I've brought something nice for you all," a voice said. But his voice was so husky that the kids knew right away it was the wolf. "We won't open the door for you," cried the kids. "You're not our mother. Our mother has a beautiful voice. But yours is husky. You're the wolf." So the wolf went to the general store and bought a big piece of chalk. He ate it and cheered up. Then he came back and knocked on the door, calling out in a loud voice, "Open up, children. It's mommy. I've brought you all some nice things." But the wolf had his black front paws hanging on the windowsill. The little goats saw him and cried out, "I won't open it for you. Mommy doesn't have black paws like you. You're a wolf." So the wolf ran to the baker's shop and said, "I tripped and hurt my feet. Please rub the batter on them." The baker rubbed the batter on the wolf's front paws, and the wolf then ran to the miller and said, "Please sprinkle some white flour on my front paws." The miller thought that the wolf was trying to trick someone again, so he refused. The wolf then threatened him, "Hurry up and do it, or I'll eat you." The miller got scared, so he painted the wolf's front paws white. That's what humans are like, after all. Then the bad guy went into the goat's house again and knocked on the door. And, "Children, open the door. Mother has come back and brought all of us good things from the forest," he said. Then the little goats all cried out at once, "Show us your feet first, and then we will know if you are our mother or not." So the wolf put his front paws on the windowsill. When the little goats saw that his feet were white, they were convinced that all that had just happened to be true. So they opened the door. But to their surprise, it was the wolf who had come in. Everyone was shocked and tried to hide in a hurry. One went under the desk, the second into the bed, the third into the fireplace, the fourth into the kitchen, the fifth into the cupboard, the sixth into the laundry room, and the seventh, the grandfather clock box, jumped into this one. However, the wolf easily found everyone, opened his big mouth and gobbled them all up. However, he managed to avoid finding the smallest goat, who was hiding inside the clock box. After the wolf had eaten as much as he wanted, he jumped out onto the surface. Then he lay down in the green grass under a tree and fell asleep. Soon after, Mother Goat returned from the forest. But what on earth did Mother Goat see when she got home? The front door was wide open. When she went inside, she found the table, chairs, and benches all overturned. The laundry table was completely broken, and the quilt and pillow had fallen off the bed. The mother goat looked for her children, but she could not find them anywhere. She called each one's name, one by one, but still there was no response. Finally, when she called the name of the youngest child, a faint voice said, "Mother. I think the clock box is hiding in this crab." The mother goat quickly helped the baby out, and then heard the story of how a wolf had come and eaten all the other kids. You can probably imagine how the mother goat cried and mourned for her poor little ones. Finally, the mother goat took the youngest baby and went outside without a cry. When they reached the grassland, they found the wolf lying down next to a tree, snoring so loudly that it made the branches of the tree shake. The mother goat looked at the wolf from all sides and saw something twitching inside his swollen stomach. Oh dear, he swallowed my poor children for dinner. But I wonder if they are still alive inside his stomach, thought the mother goat. The baby goat urged his mother to run home and brought back scissors, a needle, and some twine. So the mother goat began to cut open the monster's belly. However, just as she thought she had finished cutting one side, a baby goat popped its head out. As the mother continued to cut, more and more baby goats jumped out one after another until all 6 of them were out. They were all still alive, and not a single scratch on them. This was because the monster was so greedy that it swallowed the kids whole. You can't imagine how happy they were. The kids clung to their mother's chest and hopped around with joy, like a tailor getting a bride. But mother said, "Come on, everyone, go find some stones. While this wicked beast is sleeping, we'll stuff them into his tummy." So the 7 little goats hurried off, dragging lots of stones over to the wolf's stomach, and stuffing as many of them as they could into it. When they had finished, the mother goat quickly sewed the stomach back together, so quickly that the wolf didn't even notice and didn't move a muscle. The wolf finally got up after sleeping for as long as he wanted. However, his stomach was full of stones and he was extremely thirsty. So he went to the spring to get some water. However, when he started to walk and move his body, the stones inside his stomach started banging together, making a rumbling noise. So the wolf roared. Rumbling, rattling, what's going on? What's going on in my garden? I thought it might be some baby goats, but in this condition it's just a rock. Then the wolf came to the spring. He bent over the water to drink, but as soon as he did so, the weight of the stone in his stomach caused him to sink into the water. And so, poor wolf, he drowned to death. When the 7 little goats saw this, they ran over to him. "The wolf is dead! The wolf is dead!" they cried out loudly. And together with their mother goat they danced around the spring with great joy. Hansel and Gretel. Near a great forest there lived a poor woodcutter and his wife, and his 2 children. The boy's name was Hansel and the girl's Gretel. They had very little to bite or to sup, and once, when there was great dearth in the land, the man could not even gain the daily bread. As he lay in bed one night thinking of this, and turning and tossing, he sighed heavily, and said to his wife, "What will become of us? We cannot even feed our children, there is nothing left for ourselves." "I will tell you what, husband," answered the wife, "we will take the children early in the morning into the forest, where it is thickest, we will make them a fire. And we will give each of them a piece of bread, then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will never find the way home again, and we shall be quit of them." "No, wife," said the man. "I cannot do that. I cannot find in my heart to take my children into the forest and to leave them there alone. The wild animals would soon come and devour them." "Oh, you fool," said she. "Then we will all 4 starve. You had better get the coffins ready," and she left him no peace until he consented. "But I really pity the poor children," said the man. The 2 children had not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitterly, and said to Hansel, "It is all over with us." "Do be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel, "and do not fret, one will manage something." And when the parents had gone to sleep he got up, put on his little coat, opened the back door, and slipped out. The moon was shining brightly, and the white flints that lay in front of the house glistened like pieces of silver. Hansel stooped and filled the little pocket of his coat as full as it would hold. Then he went back again, and said to Gretel, "Be easy, dear little sister, and go to sleep quietly. God will not forsake us," and laid himself down again in his bed. When the day was breaking, and before the sun had risen, the wife came and awakened the two children, saying, "Get up, you lazy bones, we are going into the forest to cut wood." Then she gave each of them a piece of bread, and said, "That is for dinner, and you must not eat it before then, for you will get no more." Gretel carried the bread under her apron, for Hansel had his pockets full of the flints. Then they set off all together on their way to the forest. When they had gone a little way, Hansel stood still and looked back towards the house, and this he did again and again, till his father said to him, "Hansel, what are you looking at? Take care not to forget your legs." "Oh, father," said Hansel, "I'm looking at my little white kitten, who is sitting up on the roof to bid me goodbye." "You young fool," said the woman, "that is not your kitten, but the sunshine on the chimney pot." Of course Hansel had not been looking at his kitten, but had been taking every now and then a flint from his pocket and dropping it on the road. When they reached the middle of the forest, the father told the children to collect wood to make a fire to keep them warm. And Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood enough for a little mountain jay, and it was set on fire. And when the flame was burning quite high, the wife said, "Now lie down by the fire and rest yourselves, you children, and we will go and cut wood, and when we are ready we will come and fetch you." So Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and at noon they each ate their pieces of bread. They thought their father was in the wood all the time, as they seemed to hear the strokes of the axe. But really it was only a dry branch hanging to a withered tree that the wind moved to and fro. So when they had stayed there a long time, their eyelids closed with weariness, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they woke, it was night, and Gretel began to cry, and said, "How shall we ever get out of this wood?" But Hansel comforted her, saying, "Wait a little while longer, until the moon rises, and then we can easily find the way home." And when the full moon got up, Hansel took his little sister by the hand, and followed the way where the flint stones shone like silver, and showed them the road. They walked on the whole night through, and at the break of day they came to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the wife opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children, why did you sleep so long in the wood? We thought you were never coming home again." But the father was glad, for it had gone to his heart to leave them both in the woods alone. Not very long after that there was again great scarcity in those parts, and the children heard their mother say at night in bed to their father, "Everything is finished up, we have only half a loaf." And after that the tale comes to an end. The children must be off. We will take them farther into the wood this time, so that they shall not be able to find the way back again. There is no other way to manage. The man felt sad at heart, and he thought it would better to share one's last morsel with one's children. But the wife would listen to nothing that he said, but scolded and reproached him. He who says A must say B too, and when a man has given in once he has to do it a second time. But the children were not asleep, and had heard all the talk. When the parents had gone to sleep, Hansel got up to go out and get more flint stones, as he did before, but the wife had locked the door. And Hansel could not get out, but he comforted his little sister, and said, "Don't cry, Gretel, and go to sleep quietly, and God will help us." Early the next morning the wife came and pulled the children out of bed. She gave them each a little piece of bread less than before. And on the way to the wood Hansel crumbled the bread in his pocket, and often stopped to throw a crumb on the ground. "Hansel, what are you stopping behind and staring for?" said the father. "I am looking at my little pigeon sitting on the roof, to say goodbye to me," answered Hansel. "You fool," said the wife, "that is no pigeon, but the morning sun shining on the chimney pots." Hansel went on as before, and strewed breadcrumbs all along the road. The woman led the children far into the wood, where they had never been before in all their lives. And again there was a large fire made, and the mother said, "Sit still there, you children, and when you are tired you can go to sleep." We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening, when we are ready to go home, we will come and fetch you." So when noon came, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, who had strewed his along the road. Then they went to sleep, and the evening passed, and no one came for the poor children. When they awoke, it was dark night, and Hansel comforted his little sister, and said, "Wait a little, Gretel, until the moon gets up. Then we shall be able to see the way home by the crumbs of bread that I have scattered along it." So when the moon rose, they got up, but they could find no crumbs of bread. For the birds of the woods and of the fields had come and picked them up. Hansel thought they might find the way all the same, but they could not. They went on all that night, and the next day from the morning until the evening, but they could not find the way out of the wood, and they were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but the few berries they could pick up. And when they were so tired that they could no longer drag themselves along, they lay down under a tree and fell asleep. It was now the third morning since they had left their father's house. They were always trying to get back to it, but instead of that they only found themselves farther in the wood. And if help had not soon come, they would have been starved. About noon they saw a pretty snow-white bird sitting on a bough, and singing so sweetly that they stopped to listen. And when he had finished, the bird spread his wings and flew before them, and they followed after him until they came to a little house, and the bird perched on the roof. And when they came nearer, they saw that the house was built of bread, and roofed with cakes, and the window was of transparent sugar. "We will have some of this," said Hansel, "and make a fine meal. I will eat a piece of the roof, Gretel, and you can have some of the window that will taste sweet." So Hansel reached up and broke off a bit of the roof, just to see how it tasted. And Gretel stood by the window and gnawed at it. Then they heard a thin voice call out from inside, "Nibble, nibble, like a mouse, who is nibbling at my house?" And the children answered, "Never mind, it is the wind." And they went on eating, never disturbing themselves. Hansel, who found that the roof tasted very nice, took down a great piece of it, and Gretel pulled out a large round window pane, and sat her down and began upon it. Then the door opened, and an aged woman came out, leaning upon a crutch. Hansel and Gretel felt very frightened, and let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head, and said, "Ah, my dear children, how come you here? You must come indoors and stay with me, you will be no trouble." So she took them each by the hand, and led them into her little house. And there they found a good meal laid out, of milk and pancakes, with sugar, apples, and nuts. After that she showed them 2 little white beds, and Hansel and Gretel laid themselves down on them, and thought they were in heaven. The old woman, although her behavior was so kind, was a wicked witch, who lay in wait for children, and had built the little house on purpose to entice them. When they were once inside, she used to kill them, cook them, and eat them, and then it was a feast day with her. The witch's eyes were red, and she could not see very far, but she had a keen scent, like the beasts, and knew very well when human creatures were near. When she knew that Hansel and Gretel were coming, she gave a spiteful laugh, and said triumphantly, "I have them, and they shall not escape me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she got up to look at them, and as they lay sleeping so peacefully with round rosy cheeks, she said to herself, "What a fine feast I shall have." Then she grasped Hansel with her withered hand, and led him into a little stable, and shut him up behind a grating, and call and scream as he might, it was no good. Then she went back to Gretel and shook her, crying, "Get up, lazy bones. Fetch water, and cook something nice for your brother. He is outside in the stable, and must be fattened up. And when he is fat enough I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was of no use, she had to do what the wicked witch bade her. And so the best kind of victuals was cooked for poor Hansel, while Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Each morning the old woman visited the little stable, and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your finger, that I may tell if you will soon be fat enough." Hansel, however, used to hold out a little bone. And the old woman, who had weak eyes, could not see what it was, and supposing it to be Hansel's finger, wondered very much that it was not getting fatter. When 4 weeks had passed and Hansel seemed to remain so thin, she lost patience and could wait no longer. "Now then, Gretel," cried she to the little girl, "be quick and draw water. Be Hansel fat or be he lean, tomorrow I must kill and cook him." Oh, what a grief for the poor little sister to have to fetch water, and how the tears flowed down over her cheeks. "Dear God, pray help us," cried she. "If we had been devoured by wild beasts in the wood, at least we should have died together." "Spare me your lamentations," said the old woman, "they are of no avail." Early next morning Gretel had to get up, make the fire, and fill the kettle. "First we will do the baking," said the old woman. I knave heated the oven already, and kneaded the dough. She pushed poor Gretel towards the oven, out of which the flames were already shining. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly hot, so that the bread may be baked." And Gretel once in, she meant to shut the door upon her and let her be baked. And then she would have eaten her. But Gretel perceived her intention, and said, "I don't know how to do it. How shall I get in?" "Stupid goose," said the old woman, "the opening is big enough, do you see? I could get in myself." And she stooped down and put her head in the oven's mouth. Then Gretel gave her a push, so that she went in farther, and she shut the iron door upon her, and put up the bar. Oh, how frightfully she howled! But Gretel ran away, and left the wicked witch to burn miserably. Gretel went straight to Hansel, opened the stable door, and cried, "Hansel, we are free. The old witch is dead." Then out flew Hansel like a bird from its cage as soon as the door is opened. How rejoiced they both were! How they fell each on the other's neck, and danced about, and kissed each other. And as they had nothing more to fear, they went over all the old witch's house. And in every corner there stood chests of pearls and precious stones. "This is something better than flint stones," said Hansel, as he filled his pockets, and Gretel, thinking she also would like to carry something home with her, filled her apron full. "Aye, now, away we go," said Hansel. "If we only can get out of the witch's wood." When they had journeyed a few hours they came to a great piece of water. "We can never get across this," said Hansel. "I see no stepping stones and no bridge." "And there is no boat either," said Gretel. "But here comes a white duck. If I ask her she will help us over." So she cried, "Duck, duck, here we stand, Hansel and Gretel, on the land. Stepping stones and bridge we lack, carry us over on your nice white back." And the duck came accordingly, and Hansel got upon her and told his sister to come too. "No," answered Gretel, "that would be too hard upon the duck. We can go separately, one after the other." And that was how it was managed, and after that they went on happily, until they came to the wood. And the way grew more and more familiar, till at last they saw in the distance their father's house. Then they ran till they came up to it, rushed in at the door, and fell on their father's neck. The man had not had a quiet hour since he left his children in the wood, but the wife was dead. And when Gretel opened her apron, the pearls and precious stones were scattered all over the room. And Hansel took one handful after another out of his pocket. Then was all care at an end, and they lived in great joy together. My tale is done. There runs a mouse, whosoever catches it may make himself a big fur cap out of it. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time there was a sweet little girl. Everyone who saw her liked her, but most of all her grandmother, who did not know what to give the child next. Once she gave her a little cap made of red velvet. Because it suited her so well, and she wanted to wear it all the time, she came to be known as Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood. Here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is sick and weak, and they will do her well. Mind your manners and give her my greetings. Behave yourself on the way, and do not leave the path, or you might fall down and break the glass. And then there will be nothing for your sick grandmother." Little Red Riding Hood promised to obey her mother. The grandmother lived out in the woods, a half-hour from the village. When Little Red Riding Hood entered the woods, a wolf came up to her. She did not know what a wicked animal he was, and was not afraid of him. "Good day to you, Little Red Riding Hood." "Thank you, Wolf. Where are you going so early?" "Little Red Riding Hood? To grandmother's." "And what are you carrying under your apron?" "Grandmother is sick and weak, and I am taking her some cake and wine. We baked yesterday, and they should give her strength." "Little Red Riding Hood, just where does your grandmother live?" "Her house is a good quarter-hour from here in the woods, under the 3 large oak trees. There's a hedge of hazel bushes there. You must know the place," said Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "Now there is a tasty bite for me. Just how are you going to catch her?" Then he said, "Listen, Little Red Riding Hood, haven't you seen the beautiful flowers that are blossoming in the woods? Why don't you go and take a look? And I don't believe you can hear how beautifully the birds are singing. You are walking along as though you were on your way to school in the village. It is very beautiful in the woods." Little Red Riding Hood opened her eyes and saw the sunlight breaking through the trees and how the ground was covered with beautiful flowers. She thought, if I take a bouquet to grandmother, she will be very pleased. Anyway, it is still early, and I'll be home on time. And she ran off into the woods looking for flowers. Each time she picked one, she thought that she could see an even more beautiful one a little way off, and she ran after it, going further and further into the woods. But the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked on the door. "Who's there?" "Little Red Riding Hood. I'm bringing you some cake and wine. Open the door for me." "Just press the latch," called out the grandmother. "I'm too weak to get up." The wolf pressed the latch, and the door opened. He stepped inside, went straight to the grandmother's bed, and ate her up. Then he took her clothes, put them on, and put her cap on his head. He got into her bed and pulled the curtains shut. Little Red Riding Hood had run after flowers, and did not continue on her way to grandmother's until she had gathered all that she could carry. When she arrived, she found, to her surprise, that the door was open. She walked into the parlor, and everything looked so strange that she thought, "Oh, my God, why am I so afraid? I usually like it at grandmother's." Then she went to the bed and pulled back the curtains. Grandmother was lying there with her cap pulled down over her face and looking very strange. "Oh, grandmother, what big ears you have. All the better to hear you with." "Oh, grandmother, what big eyes you have. All the better to see you with." "Oh, grandmother, what big hands you have. All the better to grab you with." "Oh, grandmother, what a horribly big mouth you have. All the better to eat you with." And with that he jumped out of bed, jumped on top of poor Little Red Riding Hood, and ate her up. As soon as the wolf had finished this tasty bite, he climbed back into bed, fell asleep, and began to snore very loudly. A huntsman was just passing by. He thought it strange that the old woman was snoring so loudly, so he decided to take a look. He stepped inside, and in the bed there lay the wolf that he had been hunting for such a long time. He has eaten the grandmother, but perhaps she still can be saved. "I won't shoot him," thought the huntsman. So he took a pair of scissors and cut open his belly. He had cut only a few strokes when he saw the red cap shining through. He cut a little more, and the girl jumped out and cried, "Oh, I was so frightened. It was so dark inside the wolf's body." And then the grandmother came out alive as well. Then Little Red Riding Hood fetched some large heavy stones. They filled the wolf's body with them. And when he woke up and tried to run away, the stones were so heavy that he fell down dead. The three of them were happy. The huntsman took the wolf's pelt. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine that Little Red Riding Hood had brought. And Little Red Riding Hood thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never leave the path and run off into the woods by myself if Mother tells me not to." They also tell how Little Red Riding Hood was taking some baked things to her grandmother another time, when another wolf spoke to her and wanted her to leave the path. But Little Red Riding Hood took care and went straight to grandmother's. She told her that she had seen the wolf, and that he had wished her a good day, but had stared at her in a wicked manner. "If we hadn't been on a public road, he would have eaten me up," she said. "Come," said the grandmother. "Let's lock the door, so he can't get in." Soon afterward the wolf knocked on the door and called out, "Open up, grandmother. It's Little Red Riding Hood, and I'm bringing you some baked things." They remained silent, and did not open the door. The wicked one walked around the house several times, and finally jumped onto the roof. He wanted to wait until Little Red Riding Hood went home that evening, then follow her and eat her up in the darkness. But the grandmother saw what he was up to. There was a large stone trough in front of the house. "Fetch a bucket, Little Red Riding Hood," she said. "Yesterday I cooked some sausage. Carry the water that I boiled them with to the trough." Little Red Riding Hood carried water until the large trough was clear full. The smell of sausage arose into the wolf's nose. He sniffed and looked down, stretching his neck so long that he could no longer hold himself, and he began to slide. He slid off the roof, fell into the trough, and drowned. And Little Red Riding Hood returned home happily and safely. The Bremen Town musicians. There was once an ass whose master had made him carry sacks to the mill for many a long year, but whose strength began at last to fail, so that each day as it came found him less capable of work. Then his master began to think of turning him out, but the ass, guessing that something was in the wind that boded him no good, ran away, taking the road to Bremen. For there he thought he might get an engagement as town musician. When he had gone a little way he found a hound lying by the side of the road panting, as if he had run a long way. "Now, hold fast, what are you so out of breath about?" said the ass. "Oh dear," said the dog, "now I am old, I get weaker every day, and can do no good in the hunt, so, as my master was going to have me killed, I have made my escape, but now, how am I to gain a living?" "I will tell you what," said the ass, "I am going to Bremen to become town musician. You may as well go with me, and take up music too. I can play the lute, and you can beat the drum." And the dog consented, and they walked on together. It was not long before they came to a cat sitting in the road, looking as dismal as 3 wet days. "Now then, what is the matter with you, old shaver?" said the ass. "I should like to know who would be cheerful when his neck is in danger," answered the cat. "Now that I am old my teeth are getting blunt, and I would rather sit by the oven and purr than run about after mice, and my mistress wanted to drown me, so I took myself off. But good advice is scarce, and I do not know what is to become of me. Go with us to Bremen," said the ass, "and become town musician. You understand serenading." The cat thought well of the idea, and went with them accordingly. After that the 3 travelers passed by a yard, and a cock was perched on the gate crowing with all his might. "Your cries are enough to pierce bone and marrow," said the ass. "What is the matter?" I have foretold good weather for Lady Day, so that all the shirts may be washed and dried. And now on Sunday morning company is coming, and the mistress has told the cook that I must be made into soup, and this evening my neck is to be wrung, so that I am crowing with all my might while I can. You had much better go with us, Chanticleer, said the ass. We are going to Bremen. At any rate that will be better than dying. You have a powerful voice, and when we are all performing together it will have a very good effect. So the cock consented, and they went on all four together. But Bremen was too far off to be reached in one day, and towards evening they came to a wood, where they determined to pass the night. The ass and the dog lay down under a large tree. The cat got up among the branches, and the cock flew up to the top, as that was the safest place for him. Before he went to sleep he looked all round him to the 4 points of the compass, and perceived in the distance a little light shining, and he called out to his companions that there must be a house not far off, as he could see a light. So the ass said, We had better get up and go there, for these are uncomfortable quarters. The dog began to fancy a few bones, not quite bare, would do him good. And they all set off in the direction of the light, and it grew larger and brighter, until at last it led them to a robber's house, all lighted up. The ass, being the biggest, went up to the window, and looked in. Well, what do you see? Asked the dog. What do I see? Answered the ass. Here is a table set out with splendid eatables and drinkables, and robbers sitting at it and making themselves very comfortable. That would just suit us, said the cock. Yes, indeed, I wish we were there, said the ass. Then they consulted together how it should be managed so as to get the robbers out of the house, and at last they hit on a plan. The ass was to place his forefeet on the window sill. The dog was to get on the ass's back, the cat on the top of the dog, and lastly the cock was to fly up and perch on the cat's head. When that was done, at a given signal they all began to perform their music. The ass brayed, the dog barked, the cat mewed, and the cock crowed. Then they burst through into the room, breaking all the panes of glass. The robbers fled at the dreadful sound. They thought it was some goblin, and fled to the wood in the utmost terror. Then the 4 companions sat down to table, made free with the remains of the meal, and feasted as if they had been hungry for a month. And when they had finished they put out the lights, and each sought out a sleeping place to suit his nature and habits. The ass laid himself down outside on the dunghill, the dog behind the door, the cat on the hearth by the warm ashes, and the cock settled himself in the cockloft, and as they were all tired with their long journey they soon fell fast asleep. When midnight drew near, and the robbers from afar saw that no light was burning, and that everything appeared quiet, their captain said to them that he thought that they had run away without reason, telling one of them to go and reconnoiter. So one of them went, and found everything quite quiet. He went into the kitchen to strike a light, and taking the glowing fiery eyes of the cat for burning coals, he held a match to them in order to kindle it. But the cat, not seeing the joke, flew into his face, spitting and scratching. Then he cried out in terror, and ran to get out at the back door, but the dog, who was lying there, ran at him and bit his leg. And as he was rushing through the yard by the dunghill the ass struck out and gave him a great kick with his hind foot, and the cock, who had been wakened with the noise, and felt quite brisk, cried out, "Cock-a-doodle-doo." Then the robber got back as well as he could to his captain, and said, "Oh dear! In that house there is a gruesome witch, and I felt her breath and her long nails in my face, and by the door there stands a man who stabbed me in the leg with a knife, and in the yard there lies a black spectre, who beat me with his wooden club, and above, upon the roof, there sits the justice, who cried, 'Bring that rogue here!' And so I ran away from the place as fast as I could. From that time forward the robbers never ventured to that house. And the 4 Bremen Town musicians found themselves so well off where they were, that there they stayed. And the person who last related this tale is still living, as you see. The Golden Goose. There was a man who had 3 sons, the youngest of whom was called the Simpleton, and was despised, laughed at, and neglected, on every occasion. It happened one day that the eldest son wished to go into the forest to cut wood, and before he went his mother gave him a delicious pancake and a flask of wine, that he might not suffer from hunger or thirst. When he came into the forest, a little old gray man met him, who wished him good day, and said, "Give me a bit of cake out of your pocket, and let me have a drink of your wine. I am so hungry and thirsty." But the prudent youth answered, "Give you my cake and my wine? I haven't got any. Be off with you." And leaving the little man standing there, he went off. Then he began to fell a tree, but he had not been at it long before he made a wrong stroke, and the hatchet hit him in the arm, so that he was obliged to go home and get it bound up. That was what came of the little gray man. Afterwards the second son went into the wood, and the mother gave to him, as to the eldest, a pancake and a flask of wine. The little old gray man met him also, and begged for a little bit of cake and a drink of wine. But the second son spoke out plainly, saying, "What I give you I lose myself, so be off with you." And leaving the little man standing there, he went off. The punishment followed. As he was chopping away at the tree, he hit himself in the leg so severely that he had to be carried home. Then said the simpleton, "Father, let me go for once into the forest to cut wood." And the father answered, "Your brothers have hurt themselves by so doing. Give it up. You understand nothing about it." But the simpleton went on begging so long, that the father said at last, "Well, be off with you. You will only learn by experience." The mother gave him a cake. It was only made with water, and baked in the ashes, and with it a flask of sour beer. When he came into the forest, the little old gray man met him, and greeted him, saying, "Give me a bit of your cake, and a drink from your flask. I am so hungry and thirsty." And the simpleton answered, "I have only a flour and water cake and sour beer, but if that is good enough for you, let us sit down together and eat." Then they sat down, and as the simpleton took out his flour and water cake, it became a rich pancake, and his sour beer became good wine. Then they ate and drank, and afterwards the little man said, "As you have such a kind heart, and share what you have so willingly, I will bestow good luck upon you. Yonder stands an old tree. Cut it down, and at its roots you will find something." And thereupon the little man took his departure. The simpleton went there, and hewed away at the tree, and when it fell he saw, sitting among the roots, a goose with feathers of pure gold. He lifted it out and took it with him to an inn where he intended to stay the night. The landlord had 3 daughters who, when they saw the goose, were curious to know what wonderful kind of bird it was, and ended by longing for one of its golden feathers. The eldest thought, "I will wait for a good opportunity, and then I will pull out one of its feathers for myself." And so, when the simpleton was gone out, she seized the goose by its wing, but there her finger and hand had to stay, held fast. Soon after came the second sister with the same idea of plucking out one of the golden feathers for herself. But scarcely had she touched her sister, than she also was obliged to stay, held fast. Lastly came the third with the same intentions, but the others screamed out, "Stay away! For heaven's sake, stay away!" But she did not see why she should stay away, and thought, "If they do so, why should not I?" and went towards them. But when she reached her sisters, there she stopped, hanging on with them. And so they had to stay all night. The next morning the simpleton took the goose under his arm and went away, unmindful of the 3 girls that hung onto it. The 3 had always to run after him, left and right. wherever his legs carried him. In the midst of the fields they met the parson, who, when he saw the procession, said, "Shame on you, girls, running after a young fellow through the fields like this," and forthwith he seized hold of the youngest by the hand to drag her away. But hardly had he touched her when he too was obliged to run after them himself. Not long after the sexton came that way, and seeing the respected parson following at the heels of the three girls, he called out, "Ho, your reverence, whither away so quickly? You forget that we have another christening today," and he seized hold of him by his gown. But no sooner had he touched him than he was obliged to follow on too. As the five tramped on, one after another, two peasants with their hoes came up from the fields. And the parson cried out to them, and begged them to come and set him and the sexton free, but no sooner had they touched the sexton than they had to follow on too. And now there were 7 following the simpleton and the goose. By and by they came to a town where a king reigned, who had an only daughter who was so serious that no one could make her laugh. Therefore the king had given out that whoever should make her laugh should have her in marriage. The simpleton, when he heard this, went with his goose and his hangers-on into the presence of the king's daughter, and as soon as she saw the 7 people following always one after the other, she burst out laughing, and seemed as if she could never stop. And so the simpleton earned a right to her as his bride, but the king did not like him for a son-in-law and made all kinds of objections, and said he must first bring a man who could drink up a whole cellar of wine. The simpleton thought that the little gray man would be able to help him, and went out into the forest, and there, on the very spot where he felled the tree, he saw a man sitting with a very sad countenance. The simpleton asked him what was the matter, and he answered, "I have a great thirst, which I cannot quench. Cold water does not agree with me. I have indeed drunk up a whole cask of wine, but what good is a drop like that?" Then said the simpleton, "I can help you. Only come with me, and you shall have enough." He took him straight to the king's cellar, and the man sat himself down before the big vats, and drank, and drank. And before a day was over he had drunk up the whole cellar full. The simpleton again asked for his bride, but the king was annoyed that a wretched fellow, called the simpleton by everybody, should carry off his daughter, and so he made new conditions. He was to produce a man who could eat up a mountain of bread. The simpleton did not hesitate long, but ran quickly off to the forest. And there in the same place sat a man who had fastened a strap round his body, making a very piteous face, and saying, "I have eaten a whole bakehouse full of rolls. But what is the use of that when one is so hungry as I am? My stomach feels quite empty, and I am obliged to strap myself together, that I may not die of hunger." The simpleton was quite glad of this, and said, "Get up quickly, and come along with me, and you shall have enough to eat." He led him straight to the king's courtyard, where all the meal in the kingdom had been collected and baked into a mountain of bread. The man out of the forest settled himself down before it and hastened to eat, and in one day the whole mountain had disappeared. Then the simpleton asked for his bride the 3rd time. The king, however, found one more excuse, and said he must have a ship that should be able to sail on land or on water. "So soon," said he, "as you come sailing along with it, you shall have my daughter for your wife." The simpleton went straight to the forest, and there sat the little old gray man with whom he had shared his cake, and he said, "I have eaten for you, and I have drunk for you. I will also give you the ship, and all because you were kind to me at the first." Then he gave him the ship that could sail on land and on water. And when the king saw it he knew he could no longer withhold his daughter. The marriage took place immediately, and at the death of the king the simpleton possessed the kingdom, and lived long and happily with his wife. The Frog King. In the old times, when it was still of some use to wish for the thing one wanted, there lived a king whose daughters were all handsome, but the youngest was so beautiful that the sun himself, who has seen so much, wondered each time he shone over her because of her beauty. Near the royal castle there was a great dark wood, and in the wood under an old linden tree was a well. And when the day was hot, the king's daughter used to go forth into the wood and sit by the brink of the cool well, and if the time seemed long, she would take out a golden ball and throw it up and catch it again, and this was her favorite pastime. Now it happened one day that the golden ball, instead of falling back into the maiden's little hand which had sent it aloft, dropped to the ground near the edge of the well and rolled in. The king's daughter followed it with her eyes as it sank, but the well was deep, so deep that the bottom could not be seen. Then she began to weep. And she wept and wept as if she could never be comforted. And in the midst of her weeping she heard a voice saying to her, "What ails thee, king's daughter? Thy tears would melt a heart of stone." And when she looked to see where the voice came from, there was nothing but a frog stretching his thick ugly head out of the water. "Oh, is it you, old waddler?" said she. "I weep because my golden ball has fallen into the well." "Never mind, do not weep," answered the frog, "I can help you. But what will you give me if I fetch up your ball again?" "Whatever you like, dear frog," said she, "any of my clothes, my pearls and jewels, or even the golden crown that I wear." "Thy clothes, thy pearls and jewels, and thy golden crown are not for me," answered the frog, "but if thou wouldst love me, and have me for thy companion and playfellow, and let me sit by thee at table, and eat from thy plate, and drink from thy cup, and sleep in thy little bed, if thou wouldst promise all this, then would I dive below the water and fetch thee thy golden ball again." "Oh yes," she answered, "I will promise it all, whatever you want, if you will only get me my ball again." But she thought to herself, "What nonsense he talks! As if he could do anything but sit in the water and croak with the other frogs, or could possibly be anyone's companion." But the frog, as soon as he heard her promise, drew his head under the water and sank down out of sight, but after a while he came to the surface again with the ball in his mouth, and he threw it on the grass. The king's daughter was overjoyed to see her pretty plaything again, and she caught it up and ran off with it. "Stop, stop," cried the frog, "take me up too. I cannot run as fast as you." But it was of no use, for croak after her as he might, she would not listen to him, but made haste home, and very soon forgot all about the poor frog, who had to betake himself to his well again. The next day, when the king's daughter was sitting at table with the king and all the court, and eating from her golden plate, there came something pitter-patter up the marble stairs. And then there came a knocking at the door, and a voice crying, "Youngest king's daughter, let me in." And she got up and ran to see who it could be, but when she opened the door, there was the frog sitting outside. Then she shut the door hastily and went back to her seat, feeling very uneasy. The king noticed how quickly her heart was beating, and said, "My child, what are you afraid of? Is there a giant standing at the door ready to carry you away?" "Oh no," answered she, "no giant, but a horrid frog." "And what does the frog want?" asked the king. "Oh dear father," answered she, "when I was sitting by the well yesterday, and playing with my golden ball, it fell into the water, and while I was crying for the loss of it, the frog came and got it again for me on condition I would let him be my companion, but I never thought that he could leave the water and come after me, but now there he is outside the door, and he wants to come in to me." And then they all heard him knocking the second time and crying, "Youngest king's daughter, open to me. By the well water what promised you me? Youngest king's daughter, now open to me. That which thou hast promised must thou perform," said the king, "so go now and let him in." So she went and opened the door, and the frog hopped in, following at her heels, till she reached her chair. Then he stopped and cried, "Lift me up to sit by you." But she delayed doing so until the king ordered her. When once the frog was on the chair, he wanted to get on the table, and there he sat and said, "Now push your golden plate a little nearer, so that we may eat together." And so she did, but everybody might see how unwilling she was. And the frog feasted heartily, but every morsel seemed to stick in her throat. "I have had enough now," said the frog at last, "and as I am tired, you must carry me to your room. And make ready your silken bed, and we will lie down and go to sleep." Then the king's daughter began to weep, and was afraid of the cold frog, that nothing would satisfy him but he must sleep in her pretty clean bed. Now the king grew angry with her, saying, "That which thou hast promised in thy time of necessity, must thou now perform?" So she picked up the frog with her finger and thumb, carried him upstairs and put him in a corner, and when she had lain down to sleep, he came creeping up, saying, "I am tired and want sleep as much as you. Take me up, or I will tell your father." Then she felt beside herself with rage, and picking him up, she threw him with all her strength against the wall, crying, "Now will you be quiet, you horrid frog?" But as he fell, he ceased to be a frog, and became all at once a prince with beautiful kind eyes. And it came to pass that, with her father's consent, they became bride and bridegroom. And he told her how a wicked witch had bound him by her spells, and how no one but she alone could have released him, and that they two would go together to his father's kingdom. And there came to the door a carriage drawn by 8 white horses, with white plumes on their heads, and with golden harness, and behind the carriage was standing faithful Henry, the servant of the young prince. Now, faithful Henry had suffered such care and pain when his master was turned into a frog, that he had been obliged to wear 3 iron bands over his heart, to keep it from breaking with trouble and anxiety. When the carriage started to take the prince to his kingdom, and faithful Henry had helped them both in, he got up behind, and was full of joy at his master's deliverance. And when they had gone a part of the way, the prince heard a sound at the back of the carriage, as if something had broken, and he turned round and cried, "Henry, the wheel must be breaking." "The wheel does not break, 'tis the band round my heart that, to lessen its ache, when I grieved for your sake, I bound round my heart." Again. And yet once again there was the same sound, and the prince thought it must be the wheel breaking, but it was the breaking of the other bands from faithful Henry's heart, because it was now so relieved and happy.